Welcome, everyone. My name is Jim McKey, and I'm a Senior Vice President at GG+A. We hope all of you are safe and that your communities are finding ways of having dialogues around important issues facing your organizations, your communities, our country, and the world. Now, as we get started, let me remind you that our conversation with Jen Howe will go about 30 minutes until 12:30 Central Time. We warmly welcome questions for Jen from any of our listeners. Unfortunately, we won't be able to take those on air, but we would ask you to please direct them to the QA button at the bottom of your screen. Jen has graciously agreed to answer these questions. Give us a few days and we will get back to you. Let me remind you that you are all on mute. I wanted to tell you just briefly about the University of Dayton. It is a top-tier national Catholic research university with over 11,000 undergraduate and graduate students. UD has over 120,000 living alumni. Jen Howe has been Vice President of University Advancement since 2016. She served in numerous leadership roles in advancement at Vanderbilt University and Emory University, and Jen has been a very active case volunteer. So now let's turn to the questions. Jen, can you tell the audience about the situation at UD prior to the pandemic, around campaign history, around planning and the adoption of some goals for a campaign, and how that had all been going before March?
Absolutely. Thanks, Jim. I'm really thrilled to have this opportunity to share what we're doing at UD. So let's talk about that campaign. Well, UD's ability to successfully execute a comprehensive campaign was really a top priority that our board sought to address when they recruited the VP role that I hold, as well as the new president, Eric Spina from Syracuse. And as you mentioned before, we both started at UD in July of 2016. As background, UD completed its last campaign in 2002, so now 20 plus years ago. And the board recognized the need for us to build an advancement program that really established a true culture of philanthropy, as well as a volunteer leadership pipeline across our campus and the entire Dayton Flyer community. They also knew that our advancement operation needed to implement best practices in the industry, think a little differently, quite frankly, about our engagement and volunteer structures, and secure more consistent and expanded funding for the institution. Because of that history, as well as you mentioned, a strong academic and research agenda at UD, we really decided to pursue our campaign on an accelerated timeline versus the traditional route of listening tours to introduce the new president and then a lengthy strategic planning process that's then normally followed by a very formal feasibility effort. Instead, our accelerated timeline was more along the lines of interactive sessions with over 3,000 UD graduates, parents, and friends, as well as faculty and staff in the first 7 months of President Spina's tenure to gain their insights on the core values of UD and the future aspirations that these individuals had for the university. Based off that feedback, we developed a vision statement for the institution and a campaign case outlining priorities around access and opportunity, hands-on learning, and academic innovation. And as you know, Jim, then we worked with GG+A to conduct an even more ambitious feasibility timeline study over approximately 4 months and about 100 to 120 individuals. And this was our chance to determine working goals for 3 campaign objectives: philanthropy, engagement, and participation. Based on those outcomes and the fundraising results during the planning period, our trustees voted in the fall of 2017 to actually enter the leadership phase of a campaign that we've initially projected running from July 1 of 2016, our president's start date at UD, through June 30th of 2024. So let's talk about results. Prior to March, we had tremendous progress. Our UD family, our Flyer Nation, as we like to call ourselves, has really shown up. In our first 4 years of work, we've seen a 46% increase in new commitments to UD and a 32% increase in cash over previous years, which has really allowed us to set a whole new understanding and conversation about what philanthropy can achieve on our campus. and we're approximately 47% towards our working philanthropic goal. We actually have already surpassed our working goal in engagement, which actually targets the development of a volunteer pipeline for UD, and the working target for participation that is linked directly to increasing membership in our loyalty donor society, which is called the Front Porch. Later this fall, we will discuss with our board and our campaign cabinet increases in both those working goals for engagement and participation, as well as the potential future need to consider extending the campaign counting timeline. So that's where we are right now.
Thanks, Jen. You had your Giving Day planned for April. Tell us why you decided to move forward with that and what were the results?
Yeah, we were set for Giving Day, one Dayton on April the 2nd of 2020. And as you can imagine and remember what was going on then, there was a lot of conversation about whether this was the right time to move forward with a fundraising effort of this type. We had 200 volunteers recruited to execute on that day. A wide range of online and in-person engagement was planned, including very specific initiatives that our student philanthropy leaders were going to run on campus. And as background, UD had only really conducted its first Giving Day just last spring, in spring of 2019, and had amazing results, 5,600 donors, over $860,000 raised. So the decision to not hold the day in 2020, we knew would have a very substantial impact on UD students and the funds that fuel their experience. In the end, we consulted with not only our campus partners, but also our alumni board, young alumni leadership, student philanthropy advisors, peer-to-peer ambassadors, campaign cabinet, really to determine how and whether even to move forward. And the decision really came back as a resounding yes, and to build on UD's Catholic and Marianist charisms of care and respect, pivoting the focus really from 100% on fundraising to a message about community, care for one another, and an opportunity to support one another in difficult times. We made this pivot to fully virtual and the change in messaging in less than 2 weeks. And you can imagine that was not a small accomplishment when you think about the fact that we've been planning the strategy for the original Giving Day for the past 10 months. The result, one Dayton was a very bright spot in a very dark time when our campus had gone fully remote. And basically overnight, many people felt very disconnected from everything. We raised over $110,000 for our student crisis fund in those 24 hours. And that was part of a $770,000 in total support achieved on April the 2nd. One of the things we saw a real big bump in was social media for the day, which again focused on care, gratitude, and community, but it really offered us a chance to celebrate one another, as well as establish a positive dialogue with many of our current donors and prospects who had started to wonder how they might support students directly. What I'm glad to report is that several of those conversations that started on April 2nd are now some of our larger current gift conversations that are more promising to close in fiscal year 21.
It sounds like you were happy that you made that decision with the support of so many people.
Absolutely.
Another thing that happened right away, I know, Jen, was that the budget challenges were immediate. Soon after sending your students home, you were asked to contribute cost savings from the advancement budget. How did you do that with personnel, program, and other areas? And how is that situation looking going into the fall for you?
Sure. You're correct. I mean, the challenges were pretty much immediate, Jim, especially at a highly tuition-dependent institution like UD. To give those listening some perspective of just how dramatic UD's campus climate changed. I'm very proud to say we hosted ESPN Men's Basketball Game Day on Saturday, March the 7th as the #3 team in the United States. But just 4 days later, our campus was fully vacant, and the conversations about financial challenges UD was going to face in returning or crediting over $15 million in room, board, and other resources to students for the spring semester were already underway. We also knew that significant budget cuts, furloughs, layoffs, hiring freezes, et cetera, were most likely on the horizon. One thing you need to understand, part of my philosophy for our advancement effort is that we need to be a full institutional partner in achieving the university's mission. And in good times, that's about returning a strong outcome on the resources that were allocated, as well as effective stewardship of the relationships and the gifts that our work secures. That philosophy also means that in challenging times, we must do our part to place the university on the best possible financial path when those resources are scarce. So with input from my leadership team, we identified a core group of our advancement staff to complete what I'll call baseline work from May through July. Our goal was pretty simple. We wanted to keep advancement operations running, develop tools and programs that would foster digital and virtual engagement, and advance our most promising fundraising conversations when appropriate. Basically, all other things, key initiatives, needed to pause. In the end, we executed the majority of this 3-month period of time with 26 full-time staff and 19 development officers who rotated through a partial furlough of 2 months on and 1 month off. The remainder of our 86-person team was fully furloughed for that 3-month period of time. You can imagine we also had to place more rigorous internal review processes for expenditures, across everything we were doing. We also didn't commit to any new multi-year obligations or contracts. But what we did do was use this 3 months to clearly articulate what we were going to accomplish. And, to be clear about what we were not going to accomplish. It gave us the ability to focus solely on serving our constituents well, maintaining momentum as much as possible, and not overtask a dramatically smaller team with an unrealistic workload that would have led to burnout and potentially turnover. So you asked how things are going. Well, the good news is we ended fiscal year 20 positively on the engagement and fundraising front, as well as saved the institution over $1 million in operational cost. As we look towards August and September, there's actually more good news. A lot of these sacrifices by our team, as well as others made across campus, are paying off, and we're going to be welcoming back our partial and fully furloughed teammates this month and next month, anticipating to be back to full strength by September 1st in all honesty. Even our special events team will be active. While there's not any in-person events or UD advancement planned this fall, I've worked with university leaders to ensure that those individuals are being trained, our event professionals being trained as UD's first contact tracing team, coinciding with students' return to campus in the last week. It's a great use of their organization abilities, attention to detail, and people skills, and it's a great benefit to the institution. You can imagine we will need to keep our work priorities well defined for the fall, because programmatic and operational support for advancement is not 100% guaranteed to return to its previous level right away. At the same time, I don't want anyone to have the impression that we're sitting still and waiting to see what happens. We've already begun to make some additional investment in key programs that needed enhancement even prior to COVID, including our traditional annual giving program and our planned giving program. And at the same time, we're rethinking key work around telefund, reunion, programming, and in-person events that may not have offered us as much ROI as we had hoped for in the past. Let me just kind of conclude, if you don't mind, this question by saying I'm really humbled by and proud of the sacrifice that so many of my teammates made to ensure UD has the cash reserves that are making this fall semester possible. As many people on this call will know from their own experiences, very little prepares you to make these type of decisions that impact people's lives in a very significant way. And I find myself very fortunate to have had a team that understood this when it was happening and were really willing to do their part.
Jen, given what you described with the rolling furloughs of your Major Gifts team, how have you been working on donor-facing activity, and what have the biggest challenges been? What's worked well?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think we're like everybody, right? We're learning a great deal very fast about how to work in this new environment. The element of donor-facing, volunteer-facing activity is critical to our work in normal times, and it's going to remain so, even as I think other traditional practices in advancement might become diminished or even eliminated post-pandemic. The initial challenge was just getting everyone to understand the importance of keeping our conversations and interactions going. Jim, one of your former GG+A colleagues, Kathleen Kavanaugh, whom I had the pleasure to work with during the 2008-2010 recession time period, used to say to me and our teams then, keep talking to your prospects. They're going to remember who treated them differently during bad times and who only shows up when things are going well. And so, in my mind, the very first step was really we had to get our development engagement officers comfortable with the idea that, it's okay to still do our work. It's okay to still reach out, especially as long as it's done in an appropriate and thoughtful way. I would say thus far, our success in sustaining activity has really been around tone and timing. The approach is pretty straightforward. We're putting our long-term relationship with the individual or the funding organization as the first priority. But we are not being bashful about exploring conversations, whether they're happening by phone, text, Zoom, or in person. Really key things like how are they doing at this time personally and professionally? What are they thinking about with regards to their long-term philanthropic and volunteer goals? When appropriate, obviously we're soliciting for gifts and asking people to obligate their time and expertise to volunteer leadership roles. And, we're being respectful of the timelines and the boundaries that they are setting in their conversations with us. I think equally important is, we've recognized that this work is requiring new tools, new resources in order to sustain that activity. So we've looked into developing a more robust storytelling effort that will offer development and engagement officers positive and consistent news to customize and share with their constituents at all gift levels. I'm really proud of the fact that during this critical time, we were able to effectively launch UDigital, our new virtual engagement site, which really is focused on professional development, lifelong learning, and networking for our graduates and other constituents. And then finally, really working with campus partners to expand the number of virtual engagement opportunities that our graduates, parents, and friends might have with UD students in the fall semester, knowing that we won't be able to offer the typical in-person experiences. What can we do from a virtual or digital perspective? So my number one piece of advice regarding sustained activity is don't be presumptive. You never want to be presumptive in your interactions with supporters and volunteers, including presuming that because of the pandemic, the economy, that they don't have the time or the resources to be involved. And in fact, I'm really encouraged to see at UD that several people who have never really responded to us in the past are now indicating a willingness to engage and in many cases give.
As an advancement leader, Jen, how do you see this crisis as an opportunity to look differently at your team's work? And do you see any silver linings?
Well, yeah, there's definitely silver linings. So we'll start with the positive, and I'll come back to that. But I think no one knows for sure how different everything will look, whether it's pandemic related or the changes and challenges that we're facing as a society around racial and social injustice and inequities. But I think it's safe to say that the long-term impact will be significant in all likelihood. So I think in the meantime, it's really important to think about what we can do now. And I've looked at it in this way. Now's the time for us to do a couple critical things. Identify areas of our work that may no longer have relevance or do not really offer the right ROI for the institution. Our advancement team at UD, like many of our peers, has historically struggled, to make those decisions about what to stop doing, whether it's out of routine, tradition, or convenience. And now is the time where our teams can really evaluate those areas for the future and make the thoughtful decision to either walk away from many or to explore new models or new methods. I mentioned earlier several areas that we're actually actively reassessing, and I suspect there'll be more in the coming months. The second thing is investing in overall stewardship, as well as the high touch outreach for our highest potential, most loyal philanthropic investors. This is equally important to the case statements I talked about a moment ago, around student success, and that would help us tap into a broader base of donors for the institution. I would encourage those who lead teams to understand the true value of professional development and retention, even in a time like this. Our staff need to feel impactful in their work and prepared to thrive in a challenging environment. This crisis means they're going to need better skills sets around communication, collaboration, remote working, cultural competencies, you name it. So without breaking the budget, we're trying to think about what are the ways we can help them prepare for this new reality. And are there cross-training and or mentoring efforts, that really don't cost you a lot other than just the time, expertise, and teamwork that you have right at your disposal, to accelerate across your division. These skills, I know if I take the time now to invest them, are going to serve team members well in the current environment, but I think it promotes greater functionality for the team if we were to experience future changes, and it also prepares them to take on whatever is their next professional role. And finally, I think the other thing that I kind of looked at is setting realistic but ambitious goals that'll motivate our team. I think setting mile markers of success or progress while acknowledging unprecedented challenges is important. And it's not just important to our team. I think we have to remember it's important to our donors and our institutions, and especially for institutions like ours that are in this current stage of a campaign. You need to feel that there's a way, despite all of the uncertainty, to maintain momentum, energy around shared objectives that we've set around philanthropy, engagement, participation. You don't want to lose that sense of progress. So let me go back to your question, your second part of your question about silver linings that I might have identified. I think I'll focus on two. First is the importance of effective communication, internal or external, is now top of mind for everyone. Again, whether you're talking about internal or external audiences, communication that is clear, consistent, builds trust and transparency, creates space for voices of all types is really, really critical at this moment. I'll give you just one example on the internal front for UD. One of my prospect researchers was talking with me recently about in his mind, the big leap his team has made in using instant messaging, drop-in Zoom chat hours, as a way to have a running dialogue, not just with one another in prospect research, but also the army of development officers that they work with, and all of them now being 100% remote. And he talked about that he's hoping that they're going to sustain this level of timeliness and connectivity and open information sharing when we're back in the office together, because his fear is that they'll return solely to the more formal meetings and conversations that were scheduled between his team and those teams, which at this point, looking back, they may have seemed effective or productive, but at this time, he feels like this constant kind of running connectivity and dialogue is a much more effective way for them to feel jointly vested in achieving certain outcomes. So that's one. And then I guess this other silver lining is probably the ability of our institution and our team to focus, show flexibility and resilience in the times of extreme change and pressure, and to really have faith in the programs that we put in place for the long term. I think many of us often wonder whether our institutions or our teams can walk the talk and really make those timely decisions when challenges arise. Each of us has gotten to see where institutions are strong and resilient, but we've also seen where we have gaps and a lot of work to still do on that front.
In my conversations with clients who are senior leaders, they've said this is a really different time for them. What has it been like to be a senior administrator during the pandemic? And what roles have you played with your administrative peers?
Yeah. What has it been like? Let's be direct. Rewarding and exhausting. So our president's cabinet, which is about 11 individuals, along with a 150-person kind of path forward team of faculty, staff, and students, have really set the plan and tone for our response to the challenges throughout the spring, summer, and return to campus this fall. A great deal of my time each week, approximately 50% or more, is spent around understanding the execution of this work, as well as navigating how it impacts the advancement team's efforts. This is, say, in comparison to the donor-related and board-focused travel and meetings that used to occupy over 75% of my time. So very different environment personally. The decisions around summer staffing and budget, really critical to campus in the early spring, of course. And now a large part of our focus is around communication to students, parents, alumni, and donors about how different a return to campus is going to feel and look. Just for your reference, we began moving students back onto campus August the 8th in a graduated process, and should begin our hybrid model of instruction on Monday the 24th if the plan stays on track. Some people have likened the current situation to being similar to the 2008 recessionary period, or the high emotion and uncertain time right after September 11th, but I'm going to tend to disagree. I think in each of those time periods, we were at least able to get together in person and really determine what we thought should happen next, as well as, express concern for one another. And now you're leading and having these conversations in a time of really significant isolation in many cases. And you're also doing it on an unknown timeline for resolution. So beyond my official duties, I found myself serving, more and more as a sounding board, not just to the president and my president cabinet peers, in areas even outside of my direct area of responsibility. And the issues that we're dealing with are complex. They're financial, they're crisis communications, they're race relations, et cetera. And at UD, many of my fellow vice presidents were not in leadership roles either at Dayton or at previous institutions during times of crisis. They're relatively young in their tenures. And so as someone who's been through that type of thing before, you try to serve as, just an additional voice of perspective and experience. But sometimes I think really the biggest thing that I can do for my peers or even for advancement team members, and even in some cases our external constituents, is just listen. I think there's a real need for leaders right now who can make the hard decisions, but do so with a level of empathy and transparency. I read a recent article on leadership and resiliency that offered an opinion that really stuck with me. It said something along the lines of the best senior leaders today in higher ed are exhibiting both confidence in the institution's ability and need to persist in its mission while reflecting a true sense of compassion. That's a pretty challenging balance, right? But, I'm working hard to get better at that every day and to help others around me feel confident in doing the same.
Jen, I have a last question for you, which is, I know that student financial aid has been the highest priority of your campaign. You were already seeking spendable dollars as well as endowment dollars. How has that been going?
You're right, we were very fortunate. A large part of our comprehensive campaign is focused on people and programs and scholarships that address access, completion of degree, and reduction of student debt as a top priority. We're hoping to have over half our campaign funds come in for that purpose. Prior to the pandemic, we'd made some good progress on this, especially in fiscal year 18 and 19, where we saw over 20% of our new commitments per year go to endowment, with the largest majority focused on scholarship. I think overall, we've seen close to 57 million in quite a short period of time go to that purpose. Furthermore, a large part of the current use dollars received over the last 4 years has not only fueled financial aid, but gone to student hands-on learning opportunities that train our students to be what we call day one ready to contribute post-graduation in their work life and their communities. Like many universities, our case for student support has strengthened greatly in the current environment. I think, with few notable exceptions, in fact, the majority of our active gift conversations at all levels, leadership annual giving, major gifts, principal gifts, are focused on students and their ability to attend UD and have that full experience. We're primarily, one thing of note, using student voices and stories to drive the conversation in many cases, as we found they are the most highly effective at articulating what a difference UD is making in their lives and future. And in fact, we're building out a broader message right now about student success. It really starts with the financial aid piece, but then progresses to hands-on learning, and then moves to emphasizing resources that promote student mental and physical well-being on campus and beyond graduation. This more holistic outcome of our students is becoming a primary interest to our donors, and you can imagine not just our alumni, but our parent prospects. So even on the unrestricted solicitation front, we are seeing strong returns when those appeals are preceded and followed by messages about student need, and then the wide ranges of services, programs, and tools that are required to ensure they have that very unique and complete UD experience and graduate, not hampered by unsurmountable debt.
Jen, thanks so much for offering your wisdom and your experiences to our listeners today. This has been really informative and helpful conversation. I want to remind everybody that we will post a recording of this session that Jen did with us on our website in a few days, so be on the lookout for that. Jen, thanks again for your help, and best of wishes to you and the team at UD. Take care.
Thanks, Jim.
Bye-bye.
Bye.